Here we go. Chapter 9, Existential Group Therapy, the existential approach to groups. So, the existential approach to groups is very similar to the individual existential theory. We hear a lot about Yalom, and you didn't hear a lot about him before, but he really is a pioneer of group therapy, especially with existentialism. It's again always considered more of a way of thinking than an actual style. It's not technique driven. It has the same basic tenets that we talked about in the theories class. It rejects determinism and emphasizes freedom to choose. One of the main existential themes that is important to this theory is that we are self determining human beings. We're free to choose, that freedom to choose our destiny, to have alternatives to our life, for us to realize our full potential. We must live and become, and what we become are the result of our own choices. Remember Viktor Frankl, who was the existentialist. He wrote Logotherapy while he was in the concentration camp. Remember, we read that book in the fall. And he stressed the relationship between freedom and responsibility and insists that our ultimate freedom, it can never be taken away. It's about your attitude toward your circumstances, and nobody can take your attitude away. It's what you make of your situation. So remember, Frankel's also his brand of existential therapy was that logotherapy, which means teaches that meaning in life cannot be dictated, but can be discovered by searching in our own existential situation. So that kind of covers freedom. We all have that freedom. It's all about what you do with that freedom. But then another tenet of existential approach to groups is that existential isolation. So existential isolation is basically one of those conditions that occurs as realizing our own existence, that we are alone and that we're ultimately all going to die, and that causes the existential anxiety. That comes because of those givens of existence, that death, freedom, and the existential isolation and meaninglessness. When we experience those, they're unavoidable, and we are confronted with this anxiety when we become really aware of our vulnerability, that we're all, basically we're responsible for ourselves and we're all going to die. I know that's like super cheery right now in this current climate. But once you accept that, you can work through it and understand that anxiety is part of the normal human condition. Right. Of course, it's a phenomenological approach. If you remember what that word means, it's our own subjective view of the world. So that's different from other therapies, from other theories. This is a phenomenological approach. We allow ourselves as therapists to be affected by the client's therapeutic experience when we're doing an existential group. Part of the focus of existential therapy and existential therapy group, the main task for the group leader is to confront members with the reality of their freedom and of the ways in which they are restricting or denying it. So, for example, if a group participant presented themselves as a victim and they're talking about being helpless and powerless and they're blaming everyone else, a good place for members to start on the road to greater self-determination is to become aware of the role they have chosen to play. So when you see that reflected back and see how you are allowing your environment, you're constructing your environment, there can be a lot of growth from that when the client takes the personal responsibility for their own life. Reflecting that back to them. There's a great example on page 232 of Ed. I think I probably heard that. Of the case of Edward here. Edward reluctantly joined one of the groups. I say reluctantly because he had serious misgivings about the value of participating in the group. He's 62 and had settled into a passive, predictable, but comfortable and safe life as a successful business executive. When he joined, he presented himself with this statement: I don't know if this group will do me any good or not. Frankly, I think I'm too old to change and that what I have is the most I can hope to get from life. Everything's going to stay the same. In spite of his own statement, and in spite of the fact that his life was orderly and safe, he felt that he was drying up and life had lost zest. He was ready to change, even though he was not sure whether change was possible. So he got involved with the group and he began to realize he had options, many more than he thought possible. He had blamed his wife, his 3 sons, his daughter for the fact he couldn't change jobs and live the life he wanted. He was avoiding responsibility for his own problems by focusing on the family's expectations, often without verifying whether they expected that of him or not, which we see this a lot in therapy. This is something that happens a lot. People assume things, but they don't have any evidence for that um, to be true. So the other members in the group, they challenged Edward to begin thinking for himself about how he wanted his life to be different. And as the therapist, as a group leader, you would say, if you were to continue living for the rest of your life as you are now with no basic changes, how would you feel about that? So that would be a question you would ask as an existential group therapist. Assume that your family would be willing to make the changes in lifestyle that you would want to make. How would your life be different a year from now, 5 years from now? What steps can you take today that will help you make some of the changes you want to make? That safety allowed Edward to explore the meaning of crisis as a place for rediscovering opportunities and challenges that have been forgotten. So there's a good example to help you understand how you would tackle responsibility. You see this example of Edward to back up the lack of responsibility for what's happening to the client, excessive demands on life, etc. Stop deceiving yourself about that. Your aim, of course, in the group with Edward is to set him free and help the clients accept life and all the complexities and paradoxes, and help people face up to difficulties with courage, much like our friend Viktor Frankl. Okay, guys, I'm always trying to turn the slides, and then there we go. And I know some of this is cut off, so hopefully it's not too annoying for you guys. More purpose of existential groups. Enable those members to become truthful with themselves, helping Edward in our example to be able to face the truth. Like, he doesn't really have the evidence. He doesn't know, and he's creating his own misery. He's responsible for himself. Widening members' perspectives on themselves and the world around them, just said that, and clarifying what gives meaning to each member's present and future life, meaning making. Coming to terms with the past, the present, and the future, and helping members understand themselves and other better and learning ways of communicating with others. And now we know, now we are to all the key concepts. So if you go to page 229 in your book, 229, you will see all the key concepts of existentialism for groups. And the first one is self-awareness. We are finite. Time is limited. The more self-awareness that you have, the more free you are. So the capacity to increase that capacity is great. And so a lot of you are in advanced, everybody's in advanced techniques right now. We're just talking about this with CBT, that awareness inside of your head to be able to analyze that self-talk. This is the same thing basically, but you just being more aware, self-aware, making meaning, understanding life, accepting that we all experience some certain things like anxiety, loneliness, meaninglessness, emptiness, etc. We're all subject to those things. It's what we make of it that matters. The capacity for self-awareness. Implications for group work with self-awareness. So the basic goal to help clients to realize this is ask key questions. So to what degree am I aware of who I am and where I'm going? How do I experience the world? What meanings do I attach to the events I experience? These are the types of questions that you would ask as an existential therapist. How can I increase my self-awareness? How do I increase that expanded consciousness of self? A central theme of the self-awareness is take your existence seriously. Really notice it. Understand that we all have anxiety, but that anxiety helps to awaken us so we're not inauthentic. On page 230, a high degree of self-awareness permits us to recognize that we can make choices for ourselves. For example, and there's several bullets here that will help you to understand that a little bit better. And I'm not going to read them all to you. You can go read them for yourself. We having fun yet? It's very odd teaching to a screen, a PowerPoint screen with no people here. If you look into the history section, the historical background of existential psychotherapy, you see that the philosophy of existentialism really began with Kierkegaard, a Danish philosopher, back in 1813 to 1855. And then other writers include Sartre, which is a little bit different view than Frankel's view, who created logotherapy and is really kind of the father of existentialism. But Sartre's view is this: we are constantly faced with having to choose the kind of person we want to become. Frankel's view, the ultimate freedom cannot be taken from us. We can choose our attitude toward any given set of circumstances, as we already know from reading the book. And we're coming to another key concept of this theory, which is existential anxiety. So we talked about self-awareness, and now we're talking about existential anxiety. It's normal. Life cannot be lived or death faced without some anxiety. It can help us grow and become aware and accept our freedom. We can blunt our anxiety by creating the illusion that there is security in life. So there's also a defense mechanism. But it's basic to living, and it makes us be alive. So yeah, I mean, it's normal for us to have anxiety in life, normal anxiety. If we have the courage to face ourselves in life, we may be scared, frightened, but we'll be able to change. It doesn't eliminate anxiety, that's not the goal. It's to be able to deal with it, face it. Other key concepts of this theory are the death and non-being. I actually want to go back just a second. Let's do a case example from this. Let's do a case of Anne on page 234. You can follow along with me in your text. let's do an example of existential anxiety just to make sure that you guys are aware of how this works. For much of her life, Anne had allowed others to make decisions for her. She had uncritically accepted her parents' religious values and had become dependent on her church to make decisions for her. At this time in her life, she was struggling with following the values she had grown up with. Through her work in groups, she came to see more and more clearly that if she wanted to change, she needed to take more responsibility for her choices. Anne decided to look within herself for strength and direction. It took Anne some time to begin to trust herself, and even longer to let go of the need to rely on external authority for her answers. Making decisions for herself were fraught with anxiety and self-doubt. Although some of her values have changed, she now has a sense that these are her own values. The task of existential therapy was to teach Anne how to understand the feelings that surfaced as she became aware that she is responsible for deciding who she will be, not everybody else. As Anne realizes she does not have to continue being her old self, she begins to experience the uneasiness that accompanies not having the familiar structure to which she was accustomed. That's the existential anxiety. Okay, death and non-being. Another key concept in existential therapy. Death is essential to the discovery of meaning and purpose in life. Back to the fall, we talked about that existential question. If I died tomorrow, would this matter? Kind of living your life in that way. Being aware that we're all going to die. And will that give you a different experience in your life every day? Human mortality is a catalyst for giving meaning to life. Death awareness can help your clients awake with a new purpose to make significant changes in their lives. The way that you do this in a group is by encouraging group members to ask themselves honestly how they feel about the quality of their life. You can then ask your group members if they knew they were about to die, how would their answers differ? What would they want their life to look like? Have they ignored opportunities to change? Unfinished business? Are they living the kind of life they want to live? Can bring about change in all areas of a client's life when you focus on this as a part of your therapy. Irvin Yalom found that cancer patients in group therapy had the capacity to view their crisis as an opportunity to bring about changes in the life they were living. I'm wondering how many people are going through this right now and how important it would be for us as counselors. I think I haven't counseled anyone sick, but a lot of my clients are asking a lot of questions right now. So as therapists right now, a lot of people are confronting death. They're worried about being sick, or they have loved ones they're worried about dying. So I can see that these questions might be really powerful right now. So um, here are some of the things that Yalom says in 1980 about this cancer group, what he found. Um, a rearrangement of life priorities, avoiding getting caught up in insignificant matters. I find that to be quite true right now. I don't know about you guys. A sense of liberation, being able to choose the things they most want to do. They live in the present moment, leaving less for the future. A vivid appreciation of the basic facts of life. Noticing nature. Wow, it's kind of powerful for me to be teaching this right now. I don't know how you guys are feeling right now, but I think all of these are true for me right now. I don't know about you. I wish we could talk to each other. I guess we're going to talk to each other tonight, but more communication with loved ones before the crisis. Amen to that. Um, Fewer interpersonal fears, less concern over security, and more willingness to take risks. I don't think I'm really willing to take a lot of risks right now. I don't know that any of us are. But we don't have to wait to be diagnosed. We can live our life like that right now, and perhaps um, a lot of us are doing that right now in the wake of what we're experiencing in the world. Okay. And of course, the next key concept that we're moving on to is the search for meaning, finding meaning in life right now and anytime. Maybe it wouldn't have to be in this kind of situation to find it. By creating a loving in life is a byproduct of creating loving, working, and suffering. Finding significance, finding meaning in your existence. When we're searching for meaning, the existential questions that you would raise as a therapist or for yourself. Who am I? How did I get here? Where am I going? Why? What am I doing this for? Why am I here on this earth? Life doesn't have to have positive meaning in itself. It just has to have some meaning. Um, what provides meaning one day may not provide meaning the next, and what is meaningful to us at some point may be meaningless on our deathbed. According to Frankl, the central human concern is to discover meaning that will give our lives direction. Frankl concluded that a lack of meaning is the major source of existential stress and anxiety in modern times. Existential neurosis is the experience of meaninglessness. Many people come to therapy because of the existential vacuum. Yep. A feeling of the inner void that results from not fully addressing issues of meaning. According to Frankl, the function of therapy is to help clients create meaning in their lives. And with group, you can obviously do that really, really well. It can really be a powerful vehicle for you to do that. So let's go over a little bit here and the implications for group work on page 238 to kind of hammer these concepts home thus far. With the support of the group, participants can find the strength to create an internally derived value system that's more consistent in their way of being. It can give anxiety, and it's going to be a struggle for them to get used to this new norm for themselves, but the group can support them through that process. Useful questions that could be explored in a group setting to search for meaning. Do you like the direction of your life? If not, what are you doing about it? What are the aspects of your life that satisfy you the most or do not satisfy you at all? What is preventing you from doing what you really want to do? especially for older people. It can help them really get perspective. And the group can support the group member while exploring these directions in their life. It goes on to talk about more in a group of elderly people. I would say right now, um, for us, they're right now counseling, and I know you guys aren't there yet. We've been flooded a little bit today, and people are panicking, medical professionals and older people. Um, and so some of these questions are uh, really important, especially right now. There's a great example of Priscilla, and I'm going to let you read over that yourself so we can keep going on to authenticity, and then we'll do another example. Search for authentic living. It's a process. It's a process, I think, for all of us. I think it's a big part of being a counselor. Um, and I definitely think it's a lifelong process. Um, Being authentic can provide a deep sense of inner peace. Living authentically entails knowing and accepting our limits, which is captured by the Serenity Prayer. And I don't know how many of you know the Serenity Prayer. I think I just went crazy here. Hold on. Where are we? There we are. God grant me the serenity to accept the things. Oh gosh, I may have to look it up. This is where I missed my class. Let me try this again. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You know, ironically, I know that by heart, and I did substance abuse counseling for years. And here I am in my office at home, and I can't remember it. Go figure. It's very different teaching like this. So we'll say I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy teaching in front of you guys. Okay. All right. Where are we now? Existential guilt is rooted in the realization that we fall short of becoming what we could become. And we, as therapists, we're existential group therapists, we're challenging those clients, like back to these questions we were talking about before, to become their full and authentic selves. More key concepts for existentialism in group therapy: aloneness and relatedness. So we're back to that concept that we already talked about, that existential isolation, this aloneness, to know that we're basically alone. We come into the world alone and we leave alone. We're basically alone. And being able to accept that we are alone and embrace solitude can be super healing for ourselves. Getting time alone with you, being okay being alone. There's a Dr. Bill joke with my clients at the field group, and one of my things is, when you can be okay alone, you're well. When you're okay with you and you enjoy being alone and having solitude and reflection, then you are on your way, my friends. And it also is confronting that and being okay with you, and being okay with what's going on in your head and in your soul. And so that does not mean that we don't need people. So that does not mean that isolation is healthy or healing. We need people. We're social beings. We've got to have connection. We've got to be related to others. But we have to be okay with us too, and be aware that we are alone. We come in alone, we leave alone. And while that creates anxiety, when managing that will help us to realize our self-actualization, and fully grow in our self-awareness. So I like what Zur says on 241. It reminds us that we come to terms with our sense of loneliness even in the midst of community. We're social beings, and we depend on interpersonal relationships for humanness. We have a desire for meaningful connections, a hope to be significant in another's world, a desire to feel that another's presence is important in our world. And unless we can find our own strength within ourselves, we cannot have a nourishing relationship with others. So really important. We have an example here for Preston down on the page of 241. If you want to follow along, we can talk about the case of Preston. It shows that a person can be with others and at the same time can be very much alone. In a group session, Preston said he felt cut off from everyone in the group. He felt like a spectator who seems out of place. The group leader asked if he would be willing to experiment with really separating himself from the group and observing it from a distance. It's a little gestalty there, isn't it? He agreed to leave in a little psychodrama right there, isn't it? Little tenet of it. He agreed to leave the room, sit outside on the balcony, and observe what was going on through the window. I asked him to be aware of what he was thinking and feeling as he sat out there observing. He was told to return to the group when he was ready to talk about what he had experienced sitting on the outside. When he returned, Preston said that for the first time he realized how safe it was for him to keep himself at a spectator role, and that he was ready to do something different. I asked him if he would go around to each person in the group and complete 2 sentences. One way I've kept you at a distance is by blank, and one way I can be closer to you is by blank. After he made the rounds, Preston described the circumstances in which he typically felt alone. Even when surrounded by many people, he spoke of his desire to achieve intimacy and of his fears of approaching people. His work in the group had intensified his attempts to keep him separate, which finally resulted in a desire to change. So there's an example of how you will relate this aloneness and relatedness back to the client in the group therapy session. Gone over all that. So what are your roles and functions of a group leader as an existential group leader? So therapy is a partnership shared between the therapist and the client. As a group leader, you're helping your group members transform themselves, and your presence as leader and subjectivity are essential to that working relationship with the clients in the group. Your main task is to increase their awareness, and we went through several examples of how you would do that, case examples in the book, and each of the key concepts in each of the areas. So hopefully those case examples really hammered it home for you guys to understand, how would I do this in group? How would I be an existential group therapist? And again, like I said, in today's world, these questions are really helpful for people, I think, right now. You encourage your members to assess ways their freedom was maybe restricted. Remember, we talked about that. Reflect on how they can increase choices and assume responsibility for themselves and their own choices in life with that first case we talked about. You try to understand their reality rather than not having a diagnosis, treatment, prognosis. It's more about their reality and those open-ended questions to help them realize the freedom and the existential anxiety and their death and non-being, etc. It's not intervention heavy, it's more just questions. It's based on interventions like silence, questions, and interpretation. Really no techniques, I already said that. When the deepest self of the group leader meets the deepest part of the members in the I-thou encounter, the group process is at its best. That's that connection, and it's used, there's a lot of different terms that we use in the other sections for that. But there are phases of an existential group, so if you're choosing this for your group proposal project, this could help you and how you would do an existential group. So of course, it's very similar to others. We start all groups out the same with clarifying assumptions, define and question the ways they perceive their existence in the initial phase. In the middle phase, members are encouraged to fully examine the source and authority of their present value system. In the final phase, they are assisted in putting what they have learned about themselves into action. They hopefully become more consciously aware that they can choose to be the authors of their lives. Existential group work in schools. We can talk about this, but most of you are not working in schools. If you are, we can go over this. I'm going to move on. Group work with multicultural. It can be great for that. Choosing meaningful existence, but that individualism you have to be careful for. That's probably next in the limitations. But wide-ranging international interests. Yes, there's lots of cultures that this could work for. Lots of strengths in the empowerment of individual, humanizing psychotherapy, being equals, and no techniques, which people, it's nice if there's any people interested in that. Universal human framework that we all struggle. There's spirituality and meaning in life, which is good, but then for some may not be, depending on what their belief system are. So you just have to be careful about that. Oh, it's going to say that, I bet. Limitations. And yeah, it's not relevant for those who lack an interest in examining their basic assumptions about being human. If they want immediate solutions, and you need to be quite a good leader temperature rise. Oh, that was it. Look at that. I did it in 30 minutes. That was kind of a long one. All right. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. Looking forward to seeing y'all tonight. All right. I'm signing off.